too much evidence of. You talked about I know you got yourself into a bit of a jam around Russiagate, I suppose, by honestly reporting and dissenting against the dominant view. But like, what do you feel about that now? The way that Trump's allegiance with Putin was presumed to be true, the way that if you know, the way that it was supported by social media and mainstream media. What does that tell us about the relationship between corporate media, blue chip media, legacy media, whatever you want, blue church media, call it what you will, and our current power structures? What did it tell us, Aaron?
Well, to me, Russiagate was a scam, and it was a scam that worked beautifully for pretty much everybody in power, politics, media, and the national security state. And it hurt everybody else, including, I think, helping to fuel the current crisis that we're in with Ukraine. It started with the Clinton campaign, who generated these fake allegations of a sprawling Trump-Russia conspiracy, P-tapes being used to blackmail Trump by Putin, secret meetings with Russian hackers in Prague between Trump associates. All that was complete fiction, concocted by a British former intelligence officer named Christopher Steele. And when they lost the election, and this is documented, they immediately met in their Brooklyn headquarters and decided that instead of just, acknowledging that Hillary Clinton was a unlikable candidate for many people, had a terrible record, that they were going to blame Russia, and they were going to center this conspiracy theory that there was something going on between Vladimir Putin and Trump. So they had a motive there that instead of doing honest reflection about the terrible neoliberal legacy, not just of the Clintons, but of Barack Obama as well, and why so many people in the swing states decided to vote for this clown, Donald Trump, who was pretending to be a working class champion. Instead of doing some honest self-reflection, they decided to blame Russia and blame a fantasy they had about a Trump-Russia conspiracy. That converged with elements of the national security state, who also didn't like Trump, not because they cared that Trump is a racist or a sexist, but because he's an embarrassment. He was not a suitable steward of the U.S. empire. He said the wrong things. He blurted out the truth sometimes. He talked about the U.S. being killers when he ordered U.S. troops to stay in Syria after he initially tried to pull them out. He said, we're there to take the oil. You're not supposed to say that when you're the U.S. president. You're supposed to say, we're there to spread freedom and democracy. You're supposed to say stuff like that. You're supposed to be like Barack Obama, come up with fancy words and make people feel as if they're all progressive and liberal and enlightened while still keeping U.S. hegemony running smoothly. They also didn't like that he was talking on the campaign trail about getting along with Russia. And he also was even critical of U.S. interventions abroad, like in Syria and Libya. He was talking about, instead of ruining other countries, we're going to take care of our own. Now, I don't think Trump had any actual sincere intent to do that. But what scared people inside the FBI and the CIA was that his message had an appeal. And so the way to undermine his message is to stigmatize it by basically painting him to be a dupe of Russia, and everything he says being the product of Russian disinformation and Russian influence. So that was the interest of the national security state. And that converged with the corporate US media, which helped get Trump elected by giving him billions of dollars worth of free airtime. And they're owned by the same people who run the country, who also saw Trump as an embarrassment and wanted someone more efficient like Barack Obama. And they stood to gain by blaming Russia for Trump's victory, because to look honestly at why Trump won would mean looking at what a dysfunctional country the U.S. is, and who has a bigger role in U.S. dysfunction, the people who control the country. So for them to look honestly at the reasons for Trump's victory would have meant to look at their own economic policies and foreign policies. They don't want to do that. So everybody had a convergence of interest in blaming Russia and centering on this Trump-Russia conspiracy theory, which, by the way, completely displaces the population from doing anything about Trump's actual policies. Because if the answer to Trump is simply that Robert Mueller is going to come and save the day, then no one needs to be involved at all in trying to change the country and fighting back against Trump being a real resistance. And that's why I like to point out that during the Trump era, there were bigger liberal protests to save the job of Jeff Beauregard Sessions, who was a racist Republican who was Trump's attorney general when he was fired by Trump, than there were to save Obamacare or to protest Trump's tax cuts. And that's because when Sessions was fired, MSNBC and CNN started freaking out that this meant that maybe Robert Mueller would be shut down. So the whole thing about standing up to Trump and protecting democracy was actually completely anti-democratic and really aimed at protecting privilege. And that's why I call Russiagate essentially a privilege protection racket.
Well, do you understand the NATO situation a little bit better? Things that I say that sometimes